Welcome to the Mind of Man podcast. I'm your host, Josh Pennycat. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a father of two wonderful kids, and in particular, a daughter, 6-year-old daughter. And this one got me thinking about what an episode on fatherhood would look like. And today's guest faces some challenging questions on fatherhood. We're going to talk about expectations of ourselves, our kids, and their future potential partners. Today's guest is a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, is a warrant officer. He has served in Afghanistan in 2011. And most importantly, is a husband and father to two twin girls. I have had the pleasure of working with him over a 5-year period or so. And even though we work now on opposite ends of the country, we are very close friends and colleagues. So welcome to the show, Mr. Kenny Rogers.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
I will preface that by saying I think his name is Kenneth, but everybody calls you Kenny.
Yeah.
I don't know how long that's been going on, since you were a kid, probably.
Yeah, it was my nickname growing up, was the Gambler. So,
did your parents realize what they were doing?
Well, it's my father's name too, so.
Oh, there you go.
I don't think they copied anything.
So I just want to give you the chance to kind of set the stage for today, and just tell us a bit about yourself. So, like, who is Kenny Rogers? Tell us, briefly about your career and just, where you are right now, what you're doing today, as a family man, etc.
Okay. So, yeah, my name's Kenny Rogers, like you said. I grew up in Newfoundland until I reached the age of 19. I then went Reg Force with the Canadian Armed Forces in 2009. I did 8 years in Nova Scotia. Then I did 4 years in Moose Jaw with Mr. Pennycat here. And then now I'm out engaged down in New Brunswick. Only got here last summer. Things are going pretty well so far. Got, including my reserve time, I got about 17 years complete right now. I have a wife and two daughters. They're twins. They're 13 years old. So, the fun years are about to come. But, all in all, it's pretty good. Gives the Canadian Forces gives you a good lifestyle. They're pretty decent pay, so can't really complain about what I've done so far and where I'm going. So,
right on.
Within the Canadian Forces, I have 3 deployments. A lot of time away from kids, which related to this podcast being about fatherhood, it's going to be it was a challenge then, and if I go away again, it's going to continue to be a challenge. But I'll just being supportive and doing what I can. So
I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to make this episode about fatherhood or fatherhood to military brats, and I know so many military people, and I'm just so used to that lifestyle. But I figured, you got twins and they're girls. We could extend this to just general fatherhood.
Right.
With the added...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
With the added challenges of, being a deployed member and having family at home.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll give perspectives on both sides too.
So I brought you on the show today mainly to talk about family and fatherhood. So when you became a father, or maybe even when you and your spouse discovered that you were having twins, what did you do to prepare mentally? Like, how did that affect you? How did you prepare? Were you prepared, or was it all just a surprise? How did you function with that?
Well, when we found out, I was just turned 20 years old when I found out. And then, 5-6 months later, then they told us we had twins coming. So to be prepared, it's really hard to be prepared. I was only out of high school 2 or 3 years at that time. I was only a regular force member in the Canadian Forces, maybe a year at that point, maybe less than a year. So, I was just trying to get my life together. I just bought a house, just bought a new car. Didn't find out that 2 daughters are coming at the same time. You prepare as much as you can. Financially, it's hard to prepare. I'm not going to lie about that. I was only a corporal in the Canadian Forces then. So to prepare, you just go day by day. Or I went day by day. You slowly start to, purchase stuff, ready the room. Um, you know, check what you do, don't have, both financially and mentally, I guess. Everything's a shock at that time, at that age. I wasn't even mature enough at that point, so to really prepare for twins was more difficult than I would say somebody who was older and more ready in life. But so just take it day by day. That's what I had to do, and hope for the best. Learn as you go. That's all I can really say. But
I think there's a lot of people, like that, and would probably give the same type of, advice or synopsis of their experience in early fatherhood. Either they were young, or even if they weren't, they were just wildly unprepared or felt unprepared. I think for me, it was the finance thing. How was I going to afford a kid? I had no idea how much a kid would cost, and so I just started like drawing all my money back from anything I was doing. Be like, I have to have all of this money over here. I changed jobs. I bought a house. I did all these like things that I thought you're supposed to do as a father or parent. And looking back, some of them, that was definitely the right decision, but others are just so mundane and whatever. Like it had no bearing on the outcome of me being a parent. So I think if we're gonna give any advice to men becoming dads, or pave the way for them, really, it's the only answer is it's as chaotic as it sounds. There's no real right answer, and you're just kind of winging it. You take advice from some people. You don't need to take every single piece of advice. Some of it's garbage anyway.
right, and you don't know the difference either between good advice and bad advice, right? Because everybody teaches different. Everybody learns differently. Everybody guides differently. So for me to take advice from just one person and say, yeah, everything they say is right, obviously we know it's not, right? So you learn that as you go through fatherhood, because you're like, oh, somebody said this and I don't think that's going to work. So especially with the way the world evolves now with children, and 50 years ago, you smack them on the bum or whatever you may do, right? But that's not even a thing anymore. So, you know, um, every year is a different year, as every generation, they're always complaining about the last generation or vice versa. So, yeah, you're absolutely correct that, you do take some advice and you don't take some advice. So,
It's funny. You could walk through it like a chapters or an indigo and walk down the aisle, and you'll find 50 different parenting books on how you're supposed to do a certain thing, and four of them will contradict one another, and 12 of them have nothing to do with parenting. And like it's this market that nobody seems to understand, but writes books about it anyway. That's besides the point.
right. And it's all opinions too, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't know. But
So I mean, when it comes to being a man in the context of fatherhood, and how you've experienced it so far, what does that mean to you? Being a man or being a father, what is a father supposed to be in your eyes?
to me, a father, I think the biggest thing I noticed when my kids were born um, was the growth of becoming a man. Like my kids were born, I was 20 years old. I can't, realistically, I was a man, but, acting as a child, because until you actually have a reason to grow up, you don't really grow up, I guess. Um, so with that said, like, what it means to me is being protective. You definitely got to be protective. It's a crazy world when that little child comes out, or two children, because they're your everything then. So it's exactly sometimes what you see in movies. Like, you just feel like bubble wrapping them up and protecting them as much as you can, and like, oh, they can't walk in the driveway because a car might move, or you know what I mean. They can't jump on a pile of logs because they might roll out and hit their head, or something like that. So protection is probably one of the biggest things about being a man when it comes to fatherhood, I would say. Um, Other than that, I would say it's probably being supportive, especially as the kids get older. Yeah, when they're young, you support them by changing the diapers, getting their meal ready, helping them bathe, teaching them all life's necessities, the smaller things. But as they get older, you got to start teaching them about the bigger life problems, such as finances, partners in life or spouses. So, it's being exactly what we said earlier, uh, guidance or guiders to our children, but just supporting them on their decisions, and hoping that they take some of your advice, if not all of your advice. So when it comes to the context of fatherhood, I think they're the two biggest, for sure, would be protective and supportive, really.
Yeah, supportive. I would really agree with. I think you find, in absentee fathers or absentee men in the household, that's a huge gap. Is the lack of support, not just from one parent, but specifically male role models to other boys. But it affects girls too, obviously. But you see it a lot in the United States with their statistics and absentee fathers in the household, and how it relates to incarceration. So, that to me makes the most sense is support.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
I agree 100%. You know, single mothers, I don't envy them at all. Like, let's get that real. Like, they go through a lot right from birth with, the feeding process and giving birth, and, cherishing them because the baby was inside them for 9 months. Like, um, but then the struggle is always that much more when there's no father there. And like you stated, the stats don't lie, right? So when there's no fatherhood in a child's life, then that child usually, not usually, I should say, has a greater chance of getting in trouble or not listening or being rebellious. So you're absolutely correct. Correct. Like, the stats don't lie. So
yeah, it's not much you can do about it either. You'll have to check out the other podcast episode we did on the biblical man. It talks about the role of fathers and men in the Bible, one of which was, being a father and being the disciplinary, and taking on that role as a command, really, from the Bible.
right.
You described earlier, how becoming a father was like a mental change. What did you do, um, or how did that change affect your view of manhood? So you mentioned, for you, you were 20 and you had to, I guess, grow up really fast. And so, can you go into detail, like what exactly did that do to your mental state or your brain? Did things change on what you thought about being a man was? Did it change your perspective? Is it still changing? Is it evolving? What can you tell us about that?
Right. So yeah, like I stated earlier, that I was 20 years old when my twins were born. Just bought a house, so, and a new car, so the finances were very tight, very tight. So then, finances is one of the leading causes of mental health problems in all of the world, and that kind of weighs on you. And then, like we stated earlier, the protection of a child, trying to provide everything for your child, making sure they get all their healthy meals. Um, even as through they grow up, trying to get them in some activities, but the finances still aren't there. So mentally, it all combined takes a toll on you. Like, within 18 to 24 months, I left my parents' home. I bought a home, I bought a new car, I had twin girls, and then I deployed to Afghanistan, all within 2-ish years of each other. So, um, mentally, like, you look back and everything just flew by, but everything was a challenge. Every single day was a challenge. But all you got to do is, I can't say all you have to do because that don't sound right, but you take it day by day. And, you're going to have your days where you're mentally exhausted. You're going to mentally break down. Everybody's going to. Like, there's no way. I don't know. I don't even know if, say, millionaires with nannies don't have a mentally challenging day with a child, right? So
I'm sure they do.
I'm sure they do too. So, like, the struggle is that much more real the younger you are, I would say, or the more financially strapped you are. So mentally, yeah, it takes a toll on you. It breaks you down. Everything in your life changes. You don't go out partying as much anymore, so you start to miss friends. It's just a whole new life you have in front of you now, and everything's a change. So, you got to get on the bus and stay on the bus, really, because what choice do you have? So all in all, mentally, yeah, it's a struggle. Whoever says it's not a struggle is not telling the truth, as you would know. But you just got to push through it, take it day by day, and hope someday it gets better. So
In hindsight, though, hindsight being 2020, would you change any of the ways that you approach some of those challenges, or do you think that because you experienced them, you grew from them, helped you grow into whatever you are today, or are there really specific things that you're like, nope, I really screwed that up? That's like, do not do that if you're a young dad.
being in the Canadian Forces, we're kind of lucky where we have our own military housing. If I had my time back, maybe I would have stuck with that vice purchasing at that time. It was a third the price of my mortgage, so if I had to stick with the military housing, that would have helped a lot of stress. Um, but would I have changed anything? You know, Probably not. My children came when they came, and looking at it now, I'm 34 years old. They're going on 14, so uh, by the time I'm 40, they're going to be in university, whereas people are only starting now, right? So, I, at the time, you're like, man, I wish I had to wait. Like this is hard. Like, there, I can say yes, there would have been a lot of things that would have changed at that time, but you can't go backwards, right? Once kids are born, you don't want to be one of those deadbeat fathers, really.
Yeah.
They are out there, but if you have a head on your shoulders, you don't want to be one of them. So to say it would have changed anything, looking back right now, I would say no. I bought a house, I got through that financially, that just sets you up for your next house and so on and so forth. So there's not much I would have changed. The only thing I would have changed was going back to question one, being supportive and protective. Um, would have been not deploying so young. I miss my kids, you know, first step, first word, first Christmas, first birthday, first Easter, you name it, to go over to a war zone, which nobody really comes back healthy from. So that's the one big change I would have made. I would have held off another year or two for sure, just for the sake of my family, for the sake of myself. But other than that, the aspect of having children, I would not change anything about it.
Yeah. You kind of triggered something in my head. You could potentially be a grandpa in 10 years.
I could, yeah. Or even
Like,
like
really? Like,
if they're a young teen parent, right, like 17 or 18 years old, I
10
hope not.
years? They're going to be in their 20s, man. You're going to be a grandpa in 10 years.
I know that's crazy. Like a 41-year-old grandfather. That's freaky. That's scary to think about. But just like being a father, you don't have a choice, and you just gotta you go with the lumps and the bumps, right? So
Yeah. Um, getting a bit on a different topic. We talked a little bit about expectations, I think, from other people, or advice from other people
yes,
is what we talked about. But the next question was, about expectations from family and friends. And this kind of goes with that same territory. Um, did you encounter any extra expectations, or we'll call it unsolicited advice from family and friends that you maybe didn't expect? And, were there areas that you felt were not the responsibility of the father or as a man, that maybe some people were like, hey, you know what, you should be doing this, and you're sitting there like, well, that's maybe my wife's job, or that's the school's job, or that's not my job at all? Like, everybody's got their advice, everybody's got their expectations, but what was that like for you, and what did you encounter?
I would say the biggest thing that I encountered was uh, the expectation of being mature much faster. I was out partying every other weekend at that age. Just the legal age for drinking at 19. I was only into it really a year, legally, I guess. But um, to maturity was definitely the biggest thing, right? Because everybody expects so much of you then. Like you have to be there. You have to get up 3, 4, 5, 10 times a night with your kids. Like you can't be out drinking and come home and be hungover and not be there and not help your spouse because really the relationship's not going to go anywhere, and who's to say you're going to be a father for long. So maturity and probably survival in a way that you're learning so much so fast that you have to keep up with what's going on every day, day in, day out. You have to learn how to adapt and survive with young kids. All the little things from, being more cautious when you're driving, thinking about, who's around and when they're around, all the small things. And, you know, it's things you never think of before that people now sort of expect you to think about that would never be a bother or a worry previously. Um, just because there's so much to live for at that point that people truly do expect a lot more out of you, like to help your kids grow and help them survive too. So I would say maturity is definitely the biggest thing that people would expect out of, especially a young father. Um,
You
you know,
you experienced this double what I experienced, but you did it once through with twins. And I found the second time around with my second kid, I was able to block out a lot more unsolicited advice and these weird expectations that I knew didn't work. I mean, you set your own expectations at that point. You're like, oh, I already screwed up this first kid and I already did all this stuff and that was all dumb. Here's the second kid and here's what I know works for our family and what works for us as parents. And people still look at you and they try to give you advice. And I don't know. I was much more able to just like take it with a grain of salt and be like, yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm not listening to anything
right,
they're saying. Whereas the first time I was internalizing a lot, listening to everybody and then, trying to decipher what exactly was good advice, what is not good advice, what is the expectation of me? Do I get up every night and then go to work, or is that my wife's job? Or my wife had a C-section. Do I take care of her first as a priority, or do I take care of the baby first? And how long do you let them cry for before like before you're supposed to deal with them? And I understand that part where you're just guessing, you're just hoping you make the right decision, and it doesn't matter what anybody tells you. But
right. And in that question, you spoke to, should it be my spouse or whatever, and then you just spoke to it again, and I kind of forgot to relate to that, but 100%. Like sometimes, as you would know, sometimes there's those little arguments where you're like, well, I work 9 hours a day, and you always throw out the extremely rude comment, well, you don't do anything, or you sit home, right? So, um, sometimes stubbornness is a huge factor um, in the growth process too, and learning together really, because you even think sometimes that, okay, you're the mother, and mothers throughout history were always the one who, would teach the children how to grow, but the father would actually teach them how to survive, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm. Yep.
The mother would teach the meal eating and the teeth brushing, while the father would teach them how to, in history, cut wood or plant potatoes or pick potatoes or whatever it may be. So, uh, yeah, there is an expectation, or people think there's an expectation between the mother and the father, but overall, it's a team job, really. So,
And I mean, in the modern world, we've adapted to sharing responsibilities that are not traditional. I don't know, just in our house, an example is I do the dishes. And in fact, I don't like when other people do the dishes. That's my job. So with parenting, it's kind of the same thing. Diapers, I don't mind doing diapers. Like, it's never bothered me, but like, there's other things I just can't stand dealing with. Bathing the kids. I just don't. I let them be dirty. I don't care at
right,
all. Like, do it. And like Layla's hair, right? She's got the curly hair, and I can't be bothered to tame it, and that's a mom thing, and it's something
right.
I'll never be able to do. But I know there's dads that do it. You have to do it. You got twin girls, so
Yeah, exactly. And
um,
especially growing up, having two at once, if she has one, I have to have the other. Like there's no other choice really. So
Yep.
can I do what she can do when it comes to, like you said, bathing them? Obviously not now. Like I don't go into the bathroom when they're there, but when they're young, just um, trying to do a ponytail in the morning to send them off to kindergarten. Like, I'll usually yell out to my wife because she did it her whole life, and I'll be like, "Yeah, I don't know, too high, it's too low, it's too off to the side." So
I messed it up every day. I
yeah,
can do it. I never put it in the right spot. I don't have a clue.
me either. But that's the difference between expectations, I guess.
Yeah, the it lends itself to women entering the workforce in the last 100 years, and how that's changed the parenting dynamic at home, right? Because men have had to pick up some of those responsibilities at home, and women have had to pick up the financial obligations that a dual income household now needs, right? So they share in the workload to produce money and sustenance, which is, historically and traditionally a man's job. And now it's changed. Now they're contributing, in the workforce, and therefore men have to do these other jobs that I don't think we're totally capable of yet. We talk about equity in the workplace, and we always hear the discrepancy in pay between men and women, right?
Yeah,
I think if you were to have that same debate in a household, a woman would probably argue that she should get paid more because she's better at all of these parenting, household, child rearing activities, and I'm not. And I would probably agree with them. I'd be like, yeah, you know what? I suck at this.
yeah,
So it's funny when you kind of reverse it that way and look at it that way.
and I agree. Also, like women, they carry the child for 9 months and then they stay home for a year and then they're going back into the workforce. Like it's no fault of theirs. We're just as much or more at fault than they are to why they're not working, right? So then when they do get back into the workforce, I agree 100% they should get paid more because they deserve it. And realistically, more than often, the women are much smarter than men. Um, Men could be
Yeah.
more stubborn and not learn as much. They're more of the physical worker, I would say, but you know, women deserve what they get when they get more. So
Do you ever look at traits in yourself and, you know, I guess admire your own traits and, look at those things and think that those are the traits that you want your kids to find in a partner? And, like, what are those traits that you think they should look for, or that maybe you're looking for them? Are there, there's areas as men um, that we need to be better at when it comes to displaying certain traits for our kids.
right,
And in particular, our daughters in this case, who will one day grow up to marry a man. But like, are there particular traits that are like you must find this in a man, or you need to find this in your spouse because this is what's going to make you have a successful relationship?
right. So this is a very open question, and there's many ways to go with it. When it comes to traits, like what I'd be looking for versus the way I am myself, you always know your own flaws, right? So um, when it comes to traits, like for myself, I would say being a leader, whether that's at work, it's at home, it's with friends around or family around, always helping out. If you're having a family barbecue, don't be afraid to, be the person who takes care of the barbecue, or, don't always be the lazy guy sat on the side or the lazy person at all. Um, that's one of the biggest traits that would bother me if my child ended up with them. I don't want my daughter going home to a dirty house and dishes everywhere from a guy who's sat home all day. I want somebody who's productive for my daughter. I would say, I started my career pretty young. I started the reserves when I was only 16 years old. Um, the day I finished high school, I started, working full time. So, and it helps you grow faster too. So, you know, for traits, I would say end up with somebody strong minded and smart, somebody who wants to be successful, like whether that's in a small job or what we think is a small job, like a trade, like an electrician or a plumber, they're extremely good at what they do. Whether that's someone going to be a doctor or a car salesman, as long as they're successful and they're leaders in their trade, then I think I'd be pretty pleased with it. Loyalty is a huge, huge factor, obviously, and respectful. Especially in this ever-changing world, like you said earlier, they could be married and have kids in 10 years themselves. So the world's going to change a lot in 10 years, as you can see from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, even the year 2000 when we rolled over to Y2K. There was a lot more expected of women then, but, that's gone now, and it's going to be even gone more in the next 10 years. So I would say for myself, you know, traits, good or bad, don't be stubborn, be a strong leader, attempt to be successful or as successful as you can. Put in 100%, and if that's only 50% of what everybody else does, at least you're trying. Not everybody was born to be geniuses, like, but as long as they end up with somebody who, like me, wants to be successful, and like me, don't want to be lazy all the time, then I think I'd be pretty pleased with that. And you know what? It'll give you more gratitude for them. It'll give you more respect for them. If not, then it'll just cause a rift between everybody, really, whether that's us and our daughters, or us and our sons, or us and our son or daughter-in-laws. Like, so my biggest things: don't be lazy, don't be stubborn, and try, really, and boy, be loyal. So I think there's quite a few traits, and you could go on forever with like caring and sharing and loving and all those things, but um, that stuff comes naturally. But laziness is a choice, I think. Stubbornness is a choice. So supportive, that's a choice. You can be or you don't be. Like, so there's a lot of things that we can go on about traits forever. But I just say, yeah, be there whatever way you can, financially, mentally, physically. That's what I would say when it comes to traits.
When I was first thinking about doing this particular episode, and I was coming up with these questions, this was the question that made me think, okay, I should get Kenny for this. And it was deliberately meant to be almost like pat yourself on the back moment. Like, try to think about the good traits that you have that you want your kids to see and find in a partner. And the reason for that is because whatever we're displaying, the kids are going to find, right? The kids are going to see,
Right.
and they're going to see how we treat our wives. They're going to see how we treat them. They're going to see all of those things. And that's probably the type of partner they're going to end up with. So it was deliberately meant for you to like look and be like, okay, well, which traits am I absolutely confident that I can say I'm displaying and that my kids need to see in order to find a spouse that's going to treat them the right way or have a successful relationship. And I think anybody that's listening that thinks about this and they can't come up with a decent list of like more than 5 things probably needs to change how they're acting with their kids or with their spouse, right? Because if you can't come up with that list and you're sitting there, you're like, oh, well, I don't want kids to find people like me. I'm
Right.
not very good at this. I'm not a leader. I hope you find somebody better than me. Well, then maybe you should change.
Right. 100%.
Like,
Because
you can't sit there and say, well, you definitely are going to find somebody better than me. I'm shitty. Like, no, they're going to find somebody just like you. And there's definitely poor characteristics and traits that I have that I hope my kids never find. And I try my best to hide those traits, right? But I
right.
hope that my best traits are on display so that that's what they are finding. And you mentioned leadership. That was one of the things I totally agree with. I need to see that in a man that has the ability to lead lead from the front, but also bear hardships, lead the household financially, physically, supportively. Like you mentioned, all the exact things I was thinking of. So that, you nailed it all on the head.
And you're 100% right too when you speak about traits you don't want your kids to see, or if they see it, even if they see it, it's not a bad thing, right? Because like we spoke about earlier, there's some guidance that you took from parents or adults when you were young, and there's some you never. So when they see traits, they're going to be like, "Wow, that was an idiotic thing to do," or "I hope I don't see that again." So, you know what? As they grow older, they see more of these things, so they do know that's bad. This is good. This is good. That's bad. So yeah, 100%. We all have bad traits. Everybody do. Nobody's perfect. Um, you break down day by day. There's always, you get angry at something, or you mess something up. So um, yeah, 100%. Not nobody's perfect. I named, like, 6 or 7 good traits that I would like to see, but you can flip that around, and there's a lot of traits I wouldn't like to see. Like
Yeah.
being dishonest or unfaithful, or you could go on days and days about that. Abusive is probably, obviously, one of the biggest ones ever.
Mm-hmm.
They're things you never want to see. Um, so yeah, you can go both ways with it. You can make a list forever, but for me, the good traits is what you're hoping, because the more good traits, obviously, there's less space for bad traits. So
It's kind of a side note for, leadership, um, and good and bad traits. And you mentioned it, you wanted to see, somebody that was respectful. And like I've seen this, and I know I struggle with it too, because I'm like a dominant personality or a leader or whatever, and that extends to my household. There's a line where you go from being a leader to being like a dictator, right? And
right,
I've been called out on it by my in-laws, by my parents, by my wife, by my friends. They're like, "You are an asshole," and I'm like,
right,
"Well, trying to do this leader thing, trying to make things go the right way. I'm trying to do the man thing, but at some point, you're kind of breaking that man code anyway, right?
right.
You're sacrificing respect for the sake of your mission, which doesn't always end well. So
Yeah,
I mean, there's something to be said about that fine line there of leadership and respect. And so, just because somebody finds a leader and a dominant personality, it doesn't always translate into, a successful relationship. It might be very poor at being respectful or being a spouse.
100%. And being in the military, like, sometimes you get those promotions, and you're like, wow, I'm that much better now, and that don't work at home. It don't work at home.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, although in your mind you might think it do, but it's the on-off switch too. So
Yeah.
just be respectful at home regardless, and you know take it from there. That's all you can do, really.
So just to kind of summarize the topics we've so far covered, firstly it was like how mentally we change when we become fathers and what that does to our perception of manhood, the expectations involved with becoming a father, and who's expecting us to do what our roles are, how quickly they change. And nothing is really set in stone. Like it's kind of just a crapshoot of here's what I think the expectations are, and here's what I'm doing here and now to make sure that my child doesn't die and that they grow successfully. When we talked about traits that we want our kids to find in spouses and partners, and in the end those are traits that we're supposed to be demonstrating so that they actually have something to look for. So just wanted to summarize that and then wrap up with just what I call bold predictions when I get all my guests to do this. And I try to gear it towards 10 years, 20 years, something in your lifetime. But yours is, what are some challenges that you think your children are going to face as parents that maybe we haven't had to deal with as parents?
Um,
New
that's
parenting challenges that
yeah,
are on the horizon for the next generation.
that's a really good question. Um, I think one of the biggest ones is we kind of face it today. Our parents never faced it, I wouldn't say, or not to that extent. Um, we're still fairly young, but even people 5 years older than us, their parents didn't face it. And it would be electronics or devices or, the iPads, the iPhones. You often hear of teenagers sending photos and then being bullied online or even going to the extent of killing themselves because of what they've done. It's horrific. And the more media devices and more Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook, and I don't even know them all because I don't have any of them, but I think that's going to be our biggest challenge because there's so much out there that they can get a hold of, or anybody can get a hold of. Even the smaller things, I say smaller compared to that, but these scam people who can take your bank card offline somehow, or use your identity and get your fingerprints off some computer within a police database. Like this is all just gonna become more advanced and more advanced, and I know we're all gonna grow with it, and the protection is gonna grow with it, and the advice on how to be better against it is gonna grow with it. But really, we're always a step behind. Um, our parents or our kids now, sorry, they have Snapchat where they take pictures and send them. People can save those regardless of what they are, if it's a picture of their face or whatnot, and upload it online and say what they want about them. So like that's scary for me as a father because my kids are getting to that age now. They're in high school in a year, right? So they're the influence of drugs. Like, that's one of the biggest things. When you and I were young, what was big? Uh, Cocaine and weed. You know what I
Pot.
mean?
It's
Right.
all legal now. It doesn't
It,
matter.
exactly, 100%. But now there's like, for my kids, like there's, your kids are what, 7 years younger than mine, Layla is. So, um, right now for my kids, they're getting into the fentanyl and bath salts and, um, crack and heroin. And, in 10 years, 15 years, like you said, when Layla is turning 20-ish years old, what drugs are going to be out there then? We don't know. All we can do is tell them it's bad and hope they don't get, pulled into it or peer pressured. So, the two biggest things I would say is all the social media and devices and what people can do with them. That's probably one of the scariest things ever. And drugs. If you'll never get them away from devices. Obviously, we all have iPhones. All you can try and do is teach them right and wrong, but for both drugs and devices. So, um, bold predictions. That's going to be our biggest problem. I
The
believe
uh
so.
the device is a good one. I like that. And it's funny you mentioned that at Layla's school last year. They introduced, or maybe they've been doing this for a couple years now. They've introduced social media safety classes, right, and electronics, and they like it's all they do safety classes now on this stuff at a young age, at like 6, 7, 8 years old,
Right.
because they're so good with technology. I think my daughter was like 4 years old when she figured out how to use YouTube, right, and she was just
Exactly.
whipping through it, and so you know what? That's encouraging that at least schools are somewhat looking at it. And in the next 10 years, you and I are going to be dinosaurs, and we're not going to understand any of this. Do you know how hard it is to set up a podcast? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I figured, grab a mic and just start clicking on some stuff. Now I got to figure out how to use like soundboards on a computer I haven't opened in 10 years.
Right.
Like, what am I doing here?
I
Oh
know
boy.
they already know more than us. So,
Yeah.
when in 15, 20 years, when we have grandkids ourselves, we're going to be like, man, we're going to be ancient. But
Yep.
we got to try and keep up with somewhat of what's on the go because we still have to help guide them, right? So they could come to me in 20 years and be like, oh, look, I have this to eat. And I'm going to be like, oh, cool, you have jujubes. And they're going to be like, oh, they're jujubes. You know what I mean? And you're not going to know the difference, but all you
Yeah.
have to try and do is help support them and guide them the way, our parents did when all these new drugs were coming in and, what we're trying to do now. So
Yep.
that's my bold prediction for 15 or 20 years for the biggest struggle with children and grandchildren for sure.
I like it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I know it's been I think we've been trying to do this for a month now. And with
Yeah.
the 3 hour time change, that is a difficult task with the kids and sports and work and all this stuff on the go. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, I
And
appreciate you choosing me as one of your the people to ask questions to. It was a great amount of fun. It's the first time I've ever done one, and the topic of fatherhood. That's something that I believe I can speak to pretty long. I had kids since I was 20 years old, so I'm not a newbie who didn't have any experience with it so far. So there's a lot I can speak to. So anytime you need me, I'll be here to help.
awesome, man. Appreciate it. All the best to you and Heather and the kids. And I hope you get posted back here someday. I don't know if you guys want that, but it'd be great for our family if you guys came back. But
I wouldn't turn it down, that's for sure.
right on.
All right.
Well, you guys can follow us on YouTube, Spotify. What else are we on these days? Twitter. Maybe some more by the time I actually publish this. You'll find all the links in the comment section below. If you guys want to hear about anything or certain topics that maybe we want to talk about or expand on, let us know in the comments and or by email. And yeah, we love hearing from you guys. And the mind of man is always tired. He always needs rest, and it's time now, maybe to take a rest. So everybody enjoy your week. Kenny, thanks again. Good night.
All right. Take care.